Once again, we're here with Executive Mentor Catherine Clark. Catherine, please tell us about yourself and about your background.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Welcome everyone. I'm really delighted to see such a global audience, and I really hope you enjoy this session. It is going to be interactive. I'm going to share some insights and we're going to go through some different things, but please feel free to ask any questions you'd like to. And in the time we have, we'll do our best to provide some answers there. So by way of introduction, I'm Catherine Clark, and I just want to sort of really go straight in. As sort of Ali said, I'm a former CFO and an experienced board director as well. I worked for over 20 years in a multitude of organisations of all sizes. And I now focus really all of my attention on mentoring and professional mentoring and really helping sort of leaders and particularly finance leaders just unlock that potential to be the best leader they can be. Just sort of, segueing into this session, my own experience as a CFO showed me sort of firsthand, how important it is and was really to maintain my sort of personal energy and resilience, to deal with the daily pressures and responsibilities of the role, and also to work on my own confidence, because all those years ago when I first joined the board, that was more of a challenge, to actually feel an equal part of the board, and to really feel like I was contributing fully to all discussions. I was expected to, but, as a junior member of the board at that point, well, not a junior member, but feeling more junior, it was difficult to fully find my voice at that point. And you can imagine in that scenario, and I'm sure you're all in the same place, we had to make important decisions frequently. So I really did have to sort of believe in my contribution, so have that confidence, maintain my focus, my clarity, my breadth of perspective, to help us make the best decisions to move forwards. So as I say, I'm now professional mentor for finance leaders, for CFOs, and also for other C-suite directors. I'm a lead mentor for an organisation called Grow CFO, which is a community. It's run by finance leaders for finance leaders, with a real passion behind it for enabling, finance leaders to excel in their roles, and to motivate and create those positive cultures that encourage collaboration and more importantly, value creation for the organisation. And I also run their 6-month CFO programme there as well. So I'm sort of engaging daily with CFOs and other directors. And I just want to say up front, if there's any more detail you need on any of these things we're talking about today, there are many resources, whether it be podcasts or video recordings of different things I've done on these topics, that are all available on the Grow CFO website, so growcfo.net, if you want to delve in a bit more detail. But certainly some of the biggest challenges I see are around lack of confidence or feeling like being an imposter, which we're going to go into a bit more detail on, and people feeling overwhelmed with the associated stress and anxiety that brings. And certainly, feeling that way, and I will concentrate today on how you feel, but certainly feeling that way does affect your self-belief, and can narrow your focus and perspective, and your ability to sort of think more broadly or think creatively. And often that sort of busyness really doesn't mean that people allow themselves enough time to look after themselves, and allow sufficient recovery time. So and just briefly, alongside that, I'm also a director and trustee of Mind Apples, which is a charity that helps people look after their minds. We work with schools and universities and communities there. And so this whole area around sort of being a great CFO, being a sort of, maintaining your resilience and looking after the mind, are all areas I'm particularly passionate about. And I feel like they all come together to sort of create what I would think is a sort of true, impactful, influential and also fulfilled leader that is a necessity, I believe, and also provides huge value to organisations. So, it really is a case of you have to role model sustainable behaviours as a leader, to enable other people to also look after themselves. And I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to ask, can I ask a couple of questions in the chat just to get us started as well? The answers are yes or no, so it's very, very simple to start with. But do you feel successful? That's the first question. And the second question, and I know these could get a bit mixed up, but is, do you feel energized and focused most days? And that's also yes or no. So we're getting quite a few mixed yeses and nos.
Quite mixed.
And then quite a lot of no's, which is, imposter syndrome sneaks in. Generally, yes. Sometimes. I think I'm interesting. I quite like the word sometimes, because it's good that it's sometimes and not no, but it just shows there's more potential to feel even better. And that's really the objective here, to really feel like you're operating at your best. Thank you for responding on that. And I just want to start again by saying, I know I asked the question, do you feel successful? I would hope you all know that you're already successful. By the time you become a finance leader or CFO, then clearly you've put in so much effort and work to get to that place that, everyone has their own definition of success. But I just want to say everyone is already successful, and that's the place I'd like to start from.
Yeah, absolutely. And so besides maybe sometimes not feeling successful despite the very incredible and impressive roles that most of our community members are in, what are the other big personal challenges that CFOs face as business leaders? Can you give us kind of a lay of the land? What are the major challenges that our community members are probably facing themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There is actually normally quite a long list. And I like the word personal challenges, because we're not really focusing here on the technical components of a role. It's the other side. It's the people side of the role that actually becomes even more important as you become a leader of an organization. So through the mentoring that I do, also the Grow CFO did a survey, and we sort of check in each week on a sort of group mentoring basis. And certainly the top personal challenges that come through are imposter syndrome and a lack of confidence in some way, either internally or externally. The second one tends to be a lack of thinking time, or certainly feeling overwhelmed with tasks on probably a daily basis. The list goes on. I also think, and it comes through a lot, although people don't always admit to it, is a lack of personal energy, anxiety and stress. And that plays a big part in certainly the mentoring that I do. There's certainly studies out at the moment, or research showing stress and certainly the symptoms of burnout are on the rise. And and there is a cost. There is a cost attached to this, sometimes hidden in the short term, but both to the individual who's suffering it, but also to an organisation of not taking it seriously.
I think that's right, and a lot of these topics can be difficult to talk about. I think there is probably some shame surrounding a lot of these issues, and that makes it really difficult to talk about this in the open. So that's why I'm really glad that we can dive in with you today and just really get deep into the subject that we probably don't expose enough. So I want to talk about imposter syndrome, because that's one that I have been hearing a lot about lately. And I'm wondering, does this affect, from the research that Grow CFO has conducted and from what you've seen in your experience, does this affect all levels of seniority and experience, or is it really for new or young CFOs? What have you seen so far?
Yeah, so firstly, no one is alone if you have these thoughts. So imposter syndrome is connected to thoughts around I am not good enough, or I am not worthy of this success, or maybe I'm not as good as my executive or my board colleagues. It's quite negative thinking, but you're definitely not alone with those thoughts. So research does show that the majority of people feel like an imposter at some point in their lives. So the feelings can be there all the time, or they can come and go with different experiences or different roles. So to answer your question, I think it can affect anyone. I would say that obviously if you're new into a role, a less experienced CFO, you may feel it more than if you've had more experience down the line, because you just will have seen more, be used to more people, the dynamics of the sort of board environment, but it can definitely affect everyone. And I call it a problem, but it can be a problem, but it's one that's definitely worth sharing and worth solving. Because if you think about those feelings, the moment your mind is thinking, I'm not good enough here, you show up in a very different way to if you have that self-belief of I deserve to be here. And it takes a lot of emotional energy to deal with those feelings. And it can affect your confidence, your productivity, motivation, influence, and arguably limits your potential overall.
Right, and that probably reduces your thinking time if you're worrying about how you're performing. And so how does that tie into imposter syndrome? How does that tie into lack of thinking time and overwhelm?
Yeah, so they are connected, because you're really, if you're got imposter thoughts, they may not feel stressful, but inside that's what you're telling your subconscious. So the sort of connection is here that, you know, what you're actually thinking now in relation to your intelligence, your skills, your competence, or in comparison to your peers, those thoughts we're having affect our emotions and our behaviors. But I want to sort of start here by saying you can change how you think. You know, we're actually not our thoughts. And we have to start sort of looking at the evidence we have to support these thoughts. So the first step is a bit like self-awareness. And I'll go on to this in a bit more detail with all of the areas, but that self-awareness of what thoughts am I having? You know, how is that actually impacting how I operate day in, day out? And to help start reframing those negative thoughts. And to catch them. It's almost like catching what you're thinking, observing yourself and catching them, and choosing to react to them in a different way. So what you're doing is trying to change your belief system. So you're thinking, I am not good enough to something new. And it's a really nice exercise, which I don't want to spend a lot of time, but it's called the thought ladder. I did a podcast on imposter syndrome on the Grow CFO show. Take a look. It just takes you through a few steps as to how you can reframe your thinking into a slightly more sort of positive mindset. And basically it's around combining thinking differently with behaving differently, and then our experience of situations can be quite different. And certainly the outcomes from sort of doing it and actually making the effort to spend time on imposter syndrome and your thoughts around it can really help with your self-assurance, your self-belief. You hopefully will approach things very differently, and also take things less personally, so it becomes quite empowering.
Yeah.
I mean, should I feed it into the sort of overwhelm? Because I know that was part of your question as well. But the overwhelm is often connected with stress, or certainly causes additional stress. Now, we know that some stress is beneficial to performance, so I don't want to overlook some of the more positive sort of stress, but you sort of have to understand your own optimal point before you go over the edge, and there's a stress performance curve that sort of assists with that. Because the problem is, the moment you go into that sort of slightly more stressful state, it narrows your focus and perspective. So everything just seems more difficult. And believe me, as a CFO or a finance leader, the last thing you want is for life to feel even more difficult. You know, you become more emotionally reactive, you're tired, you start things and don't finish, tasks take longer. I don't know, your motivation, imagine never getting stuff finished. It's not very motivating. You really have to get time. So whereas we talked in imposter syndrome of getting thoughts on our side, getting our own thoughts on our side, with the feelings of overwhelm, you've got to get time to work on your behalf and not against you. And that then starts with the belief of I can, and it is possible. So if you think of the connection there with imposter syndrome, you're turning your thoughts around and your belief system, and it's the same with overwhelm. So it's I can do this and it is possible. Because, you know, if you stay calm, if you can stay calm, the answers are often a lot clearer. And you can move forward very purposefully, not reactionary to the external environment.
Absolutely clearer and probably simpler as well. And I love what you said, that we are not our thoughts. And I think that's a really empowering message and true to the core of what we're talking about. There's a lot we can do. So absolutely. I think that's a great question. And so why do you think that some of these personal challenges, like lack of thinking time and overwhelm, imposter syndrome, why do you think they might become more noticeable or more prominent? And where do they come from? Where do they stem from or originate in?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, by the time you get to a leader, you are externally successful, like to sort of people's perception of success. But I would challenge that, by the way. But let's just start with the fact that when you get to be a leader, you are certainly successful externally. But you may not have caught up with that, not quite aligned to that position. So it's about sort of aligning your feeling of success with your presentation of it to the outside world. Suddenly as a leader, you've got a huge range of responsibilities. You're not just the finance function lead anymore. You are a leader of a business. You're dealing with multiple stakeholders. I mean, your team, your colleagues, external stakeholders. It's huge. It's exciting, by the way, as well as huge, but it is exciting. And so really you're suddenly propelled into this sort of position, and a very visible position. So some of these things that we may have buried for a number of years, these beliefs that we might have about ourselves or our own confidence, suddenly emerge. And the other factor is that soft skills become the more dominant success in the role. So whereas we may have actually been highly successful, operating within finance, suddenly as a leader, your soft skills can be actually 80% of the success in a role. That's what research shows.
That's huge.
It's huge. You're suddenly out there communicating, you're visible, you're communicating to large audiences, you're telling the performance story of the organization. So I just mean it all comes to the forefront, really. And it all requires, I'll be honest, an awful lot of energy, which is why I bring so much focus in on, energy management, because it's only when you manage your own energy that you can really fully ignite your own talent and skill as a leader.
Yes. And what do you think for you, what are some tips or tricks to really manage your energy and optimize your energy that work for you or that you have seen work for others?
Wow. Okay. So I could probably talk about this all day. However, let me just give you a few pointers. I think, my top one is meditation. Now, whether people meditate or not, and you may not expect me to say that in a sort of leadership webinar, but meditation is that time to connect to yourself. I think meditation is the biggest thing that actually helps with your success, but also with an inner calmness, let's say. I think it allows you to take some time out. It allows you to tune in to your intuition, which I think is incredibly important as a leader, and just take time to listen to what your body, your mind is saying to you. Like, what does it need right now? That's the first point. I think when we're talking about like resilience, as I say, a degree of stress is normal and fine, but you've got to have the right recovery. So it's almost like stress plus recovery equals resilience. So what does recovery mean for you? And that can be anything. We can talk about it in terms of, I'm going to just define them just separately, but almost passive self-care, which is, those things that are nice to do for yourself, take yourself for a walk, have a bath, have time with friends, anything like that. They're all fantastic. But the other side of it is more active self-care, where you actually think about, if I did this, the slightly more difficult things that would actually release some of the energy that I'm holding on to. So doing the thing that is difficult, having the difficult conversation, tackling certain things on your to-do list that you've been hanging around for a while. Have a think about what you're holding on to if you don't actually do those things that are there. And another one is is actually breathing. So to actually bring some breath work in as well. So, you know, particularly sort of breathing into the stomach, not allowing yourself to breathe up into the sort of top lungs, but really thinking about stomach breathing, because it's incredibly calming for the nervous system. And when you think of how you want to show up as a leader, which I would hope most people want to show up sort of calm and in control, and, you know, people having that confidence in you as a leader. It is important to focus on these things, and also clearly good sleep, good nutrition, getting fresh air, and hydration as well. So just making sure you're drinking enough water in the day. I like to remind people of these because I think they can get forgotten in the overwhelm. But there's productivity gains from investing in yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's great advice, especially breathing. It's something that, and meditating, you're right that it's maybe something that we don't hear all the time in this context, but it is, I mean, I think research shows also it's proven to be one of the most effective methods of increasing performance and quality of life and all sorts of things. So great tips there. And I think you're right. Your personal energy is critical to sustainability and success, and then how you show up as a leader. So can you talk more about that, about what's important when making an impact as a CFO and showing up as a leader, and the way you show up?
Yeah, sure. I think, you know, you've got to make an impact as a CFO. It's such an important role, and it's primarily around giving others confidence in you and your ability to do that role. When you think about it, you're the financial conscience of the organization. You're looking after, I'm being simplistic here, but looking after the money. So people are looking to you to ensure that the performance of that business is sustainable for the long term. You know, it's their jobs at stake if you don't perform that role well. So again, there's different components of the role. It's a very broad role. And again, if I could just mention Grow CFO here, because they have a competency framework which just sort of shows it very clearly that the role is in a way sort of broken down into the foundational aspects of a finance leader role, then the implementation, which includes things like the strategic business partnering. But also the biggest part, I think, in terms of leadership is around impact, which is the area we're talking about today. But you really need to focus your efforts on creating more tangible value for your organization, you know, creating real value. So, you know, relationships are important, the rapport that you build with people. It's natural that people will work with you easier, and they'll enjoy it more if they know who you are. It's important to show some vulnerability, and there's a lot of good work by Brené Brown out there around vulnerability and connection. Incredibly important. You know, you've got to show some vulnerability for people to sort of see who you are, and to be authentic as you as well. And all of this, really, I think what I'm saying is there's a lot of factors that come together. There's a lot of real value in actually making more of the right decisions for an organization. And you just have to think of the factors that support that process.
Absolutely. And it sounds like one of those things is just bringing humanness to the CFO role, and remembering that CFOs are people, and really connecting with that aspect of the role as well.
Yeah. And you know, everyone on this call, everyone will have the ability and the capability to do the job. You know, that's a bit of a given. It's the energy you project that will set you apart from other people. So, you know, and therefore the way you look after your mind, you know, your body, your emotional sort of well-being that keeps you sustainable is you investing in yourself as an asset. And that's very, very important. Yeah, you know, high performance more generally comes from, you know, continual learning and seeking different perspectives, and being open to sort of feedback and guidance. And there's a lot of support out there, I think, but it's worth thinking about who you are and who you want to show up as a leader.
And where can you get support if that's what you're looking for?
Well, I think events like this one are incredible for doing that. I think, you know, they just bring the discussion to a wider level. You know, there's a lot of, well, I would always say a support from a mentor is incredibly important. I think there are different programs of group mentoring or different, like for example, I run the CFO program. That's great, very, very beneficial. But I think the bigger impact comes when you combine that with one-to-one mentoring. Personally, I've always had a mentor throughout my career. I had one now even, because I believe there is always more potential to unlock, and we can't always see it ourselves. So it's very helpful for someone else to hold space for you, to listen. I mean, how often does anyone truly listen to you? And that's the benefit of mentoring. It just allows you to, you know, say whatever you want to say, get the support you need. You're very alone actually as a leader, very alone. It's quite lonely at the top. So if you can have someone there for you, and particularly someone who's experienced that journey before, it's incredibly supportive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. And do you think that it helps in any way to pay it forward as a mentor, that by helping others in their careers, this can help you even later on in your career overcome some of the self-doubt that we've talked about earlier?
Yeah, it's yes, because I think sometimes, well, as a leader, you know, part of your sort of motivation should be to inspire and teach others along the way. That's certainly been my drive. I feel like I've always learned to share that knowledge. You know, you're helping people overcome challenges that, you know, they may face, you know, maybe quicker, getting through them quicker. You can learn from your own journey and mistakes, but just sometimes you want people to help you jump forward a little bit. And I think mentoring is a bit like a mirror at times. So quite often you're going quite deep, but you also see you see something in yourself that you often see in others. And so you are learning also through other people, provided you're taking the space and the time to really listen to what's going on and do that self-reflection point I sort of mentioned at the beginning.
Excellent. And I think that's a good point about mentoring, especially for people who are dealing with imposter syndrome. If you want to fulfill your potential, you probably need someone to give you a bit of a push in that direction. So I think that's great advice to seek out support from a mentor who's done this journey before and who has gone through all of these self-doubt questions themselves and can probably really help accelerate that progression in places where you don't even know possibilities exist.
Well, the thing is, no one knows, you just don't know what you don't know. You know, different organizations provide you with different experiences. So you only see what you see. So it's extremely helpful to get other perspectives and to be challenged, as you say, be challenged on where you're at, sort of what you know, how you approach a particular scenario. As I say, being able to bring different perspectives to, you know, the multitude of scenarios that arise day in, day out when you're operating at that level is incredibly valuable. And, you know, I remember sort of back in my early days on the board, actually, you know, as I say, the mentor I worked with at the time gave me extra confidence. You know, that was the role he played. It was nothing particularly to do with, you know, this is what else you need to know. It was giving me the confidence to operate at that level and to operate as best I could. And actually, and then over the years, I learned to then be myself. I think I certainly started off sort of, you know, trying to fit into the mold of what I thought a board director should be like. I would say it probably took me 3 years of being on the board to then think, hang on a minute, yes, that's fine. I wasn't being completely not myself, but I'm now going to show up as me, as the leader that I want to be. So.
Yeah, and that takes vulnerability and honesty, and I think that is an area where leaders are so brave. I think it requires a lot of bravery to lead.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the other just point of the answer to that one is never forget the resources you have around you. It's easy for me to say that, but sometimes you need to write it down. You know, who have I got around me that can really give me the uplift? You know, you want uplifting people around you, people who support you, but also people who are honest as well. But never get to the point of feeling overwhelmed, before you get that support or speak to someone. That's something I would say. And also just think about sort of, what resources you've got in terms of just people, the practical resources, thinking about how you use your time and how that sort of benefits you, but always know what to tap into if things get too much.
Yes, absolutely. And so if we wanted to know one thing that people watching right now can do today or this week to improve their performance or their leadership and get on the right track to ultimately fulfilling their potential, is there like a micro goal or one small thing that our audience could do today?
I'm sure there is. I'm just trying to think about that. I have a lovely quote I can share, which I think sort of sums that up, which is that life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. That's a quote I love, which I think sort of sums it up really, is that life is full of uncertainty, change. I mean, come and look at the last couple of years particularly. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of change. And to actually adapt to that and manage that, because it's going to be coming up, daily. You've got to get yourself in the best place. So I think if you were to ask me one thing at the moment, I would say, what for you personally gives you the most energy today? Write a list of genuinely what lifts you in that moment. Because what you're trying to do is, when you look at your day, from a time management point of view, it's quite nice to segment your day into sort of 90-minute blocks. That's when productivity is maximized. But those recovery gaps between those blocks, what can you do to uplift yourself into the next session? Because you've really got to show up, providing you are focusing your time on the things that are most valuable. And as a leader, you've really got to do that. You've got to think, where can I create the most valuable outcomes? So there's a whole nother discussion on time management and how you manage that. But in its simple form, if you've got something in the diary, it should matter. It should be important. So you've got to show up in exactly the right place to bring your knowledge and wisdom and experience into that session. So my challenge to people today is, one is think about those recovery routines in between. What uplifts you the most? Is it going to get a drink? Is it going for a quick walk? Is it listening to some music? Anything really. And maybe the other part of it is just thinking, what can I do today that makes tomorrow better? So focusing on what matters the most today to actually effectively multiply time into the future.
That's great advice. Thank you. So just a quick reminder that we want to get your questions in the questions tab. So Laurence has asked, what uplifts you?
That's nice. That's a combination of things, actually. I think the thing that uplifts me the most is going for a walk with my dog. I love being in the fresh air. I love being out in nature. For me, that is actually meditative activity in itself, just being out there in nature. And I do my best thinking when I'm outside. So again, it's not always thinking about work as being sat at a laptop in your office or at the desk. It's where can I do my best thinking that sort of creates certain, that creativity in your mind.
Yeah, that's a great question. I agree. I think outdoor time is very important. It can be very uplifting. All right. Any other questions from the audience? Remember, we do have this questions tab. It looks like Saeed is wondering how long inflation will continue at a high rate. I don't know. Laurence is asking, are you available as a mentor?
I actually am. Yes, I am.
And so what we can do is after the session, we will send out an email. CFO Connect will send out an email with this recording, and we can include Catherine's information so you can get in touch with her if you're looking.
Yeah, please do. I mean, I offer a 30-minute free chemistry call anyway. So if anyone's interested, then please reach out. That's before any commitment to any mentoring anyway. So
very good.
And I have more details on my website as well as to the approach I take and the outcomes I hope to achieve.
Excellent. Now we have a question from Ashley. What have you found to be the best route to finding a mentor? So when you mentioned that you have always had a mentor yourself for a long time. And so how did you go about finding a mentor, and what do you think the best route is?
It's a really good question. So there are many routes. So mentoring can fall into slightly different buckets, let's say. I think if you want sort of more, mentoring does allow for not technical support, but more sort of support in the role. So for example, I can mentor to be a better finance leader, but also more holistically for the person. I think the most important thing in mentoring is to think about what your objectives from mentoring are, and what particular support, where are your challenges what are your current challenges, and has that mentor therefore been through that? Do they have direct experience of it? But for me, when I found a mentor, it's the energy connection that's the most important. I think I said at the beginning, I work off my intuition a lot. So I like to go quite deep with people and actually work on what comes up in the session. So I veer away from a set structure. There's sort of tools in the background, but I veer away from a set structure. But maybe you prefer structure. So it's about thinking, do I want sort of mentoring as a standalone a standalone support, or do I want it as part of a bigger program where you get a combination of sort of content and mentoring, and really who could best support me in that? So that, yeah, there are different routes, but the energy connection or the chemistry is the most important. You're going to be with this person working deeply one-on-one. So do they make you feel comfortable? Do you feel you can be open with them? And that's the main things, I think.
Absolutely. And Antonia has a good follow-up question. How is mentoring different from coaching in your mind? Is there a difference?
Yes, there is a difference. There is a difference. A mentor has effectively done the path you're on before. So, I'm sort of mentoring, as I say, finance leaders or directors more generally, but that's because that's the experience I've had. So mentoring does use can use some coaching techniques, but it's sort of elevated above that by providing the lived experience, I think, is the lived experience of that before. So it's someone who really has been there and done it and will understand the particular challenges that you're facing. So rather than speaking, I'm not going to say from a textbook, but it's lived and breathed experiences. But, bearing in mind, each mentor is different. They may have been on a different journey themselves. I've done an awful lot of personal development as well as, let's call it business development. So you really have to sort of look into each mentor and see the breadth of what they bring to the table.
Right. And as someone who has spent quite a lot of time at the board level, we have a question from Christoph. He says, the CFO chickens out first. That's the prejudice. How do you communicate risks, which we know better about than anyone else, without the board thinking you are pessimistic and ignoring your point of view?
Really good question. Thank you. Right. So I'm just going to start off by saying you have to, again, sort of see what your own risk appetite is. So this is common. The CFO is naturally more risk averse, I would say, mostly than the rest of the board. However, this is something I actually had to learn to adapt to and change a little bit. We naturally come from, I think, a slightly more risk-averse background. It's all around risk and controls and processes and protect the money and protect the assets of the organization. When you get to board level, there has to be a better balance between risk and opportunity. So I had to consciously shift my own risk appetite into a slightly different place. So yes, of course, you have a role as a CFO, like I said earlier about being the financial conscience and looking after that organization. That is first and foremost. If you really feel like people are making decisions that don't align with that, of course, you have to speak up and give your view and why. But be prepared to think. Also, this is a question that I had to ask myself in the end. What's the worst that could happen here? That question served me very well in trying to determine whether a certain decision was as risky as it sounded, or whether actually, if you took things slightly more step by step, there was ways of coming back out from it. But the biggest thing here is around how you create discussion at that level. So it's about always listening to other people's perspectives. I think that can be a challenge as a CFO sometimes, but my main advice in this area is to, it's fine. Everyone has a different opinion quite often on the same thing. That is a fact, and it will come up all the time. But your key thing here is to listen and really understand the other person's perspective, so you can somehow reach a slightly more agreeable way forward in the middle.
Great. That's great advice. Now, Shirley, another question. What advice would you give to an introverted CFO working in an environment where there are several quite vocal managers with conflicting goals and agendas, which may or may not be in the financial interest of the firm? How do you get key stakeholders to listen and heed your counsel?
Oh, another good question. Well, firstly, everyone is who they are. So as I said, this is not about changing who you are. You've just got to show up, the best version of yourself. This is, again, quite a normal scenario that you get a mix of introverts and extroverts. My first question is, I'm never sure if extroverts are all extroverts. And being an extrovert doesn't necessarily mean confident. So often, and again, I'm only talking from my own experience, that the more extroverted someone appeared, in actual fact, the more insecure they were. So that's worth thinking about if ever you feel a little bit like, oh, everyone else seems to know more than I do, or they've got a big voice. Having a big voice and appearing confident does not equal knowledge necessarily. But it's a not as dissimilar answer from the one before. It's still worth listening. But you've got to know what things you really need to say. So it's about sort of interrupting in some ways. When, listen to their viewpoint, and then saying, and this is my view. So you've got to sort of step in at some point. It's not about creating any kind of aggressive atmosphere, or, it's them against me, or it's saying, I would now like to share my view. But being quite concise, I think, particularly if you're more introverted, just be a little bit more concise. Walk into that meeting knowing what you want to achieve and what outcome you want to achieve. And, maybe have your 3 key points noted down so that you actually at least walk away from the meeting having shared what you feel are the most important things that people need to know to make a decision.
That's great advice. Very interesting what you said about extroverts maybe not actually being as confident as they seem. I think there's a lot of truth in that. Another question from Grant. Grant is wondering, what would you say is the number one thing that accelerated your career?
Focus. Focus. It is really interesting. I don't know if anyone's heard of the law of attraction. It's not something I actually heard of until a lot later on. I mean, but what I realized was that in my early career, I just knew I wanted to be CFO. I mean, you could sort of say why. I don't know why. I think it just seemed to me like the natural progression. I was quite determined to sort of be part of a board, a leader in an organization, but actually with a passion, or should I say a clear purpose to make cultures better and to actually make them more people focused, to bring that side. So I would say, without realizing that I applied that much focus, I think I never saw any other option. So every decision I took was in that direction. And at that point, I just believed I would get there, which clearly in hindsight it sounds almost a little bit arrogant, but it wasn't arrogant. I was just, at that point, I had the confidence to believe that I would get it and that I could bring value to that role. It's interesting because that's slightly in contrast to when I actually got the board position and I suddenly realized it was quite a big step up. And therefore, my confidence was knocked again, so I had to rebuild it. As I say, quite a number of years on from that place, I now sort of recognize that even in like the mentoring I'm doing now, I'm not sure I ever believed I could do mentoring full time. I mean, that seemed ridiculous, but yet I was really focused on that as well. And that's what's happening now. So it's about not veering away from what you want in life and actually visualizing it. That's a key technique. I've now learned, although I didn't realize at the time I was doing, was visualizing that future point. Visualizing yourself in the role that you want, actually doing it. That's a clear technique for actually seeing the success that you're creating.
Great advice. And so apart from visualizing ourselves in the CFO role, can you tell us a bit more about maybe what we can do to get there, or maybe what the best route to take is to get there? Because Catherine is asking, how important do you think an FP&A skill set is for people growing into a CFO role? Is that something necessary, or what do you think is really necessary skill sets to develop to attain the CFO role?
So I'm going to start by answering that by saying that every CFO role is different, and every organization needs something possibly different from a CFO that they have. So although it's a roundabout answer, I think it's about focusing in on focusing in on what you love doing first and foremost, and choosing organizations that you have a real passion about. Those two factors are incredibly important. That is how you will achieve success, and achieve success in a way that you just love, that feels exciting, that feels rewarding. Because actually having a passion for something naturally gives you a sort of commercial understanding. In that organization, you're naturally interested in finding out more, being behind their sort of growth plans or whatever it is. More specifically, FP&A clearly is an important skill set, and particularly sort of more now than ever, maybe, in that sort of insight on the organization or performance is incredibly important. However, I am going to say, the CFO role is so broad that if you don't have a specific skill set, just make sure you have it in your team. Recruit accordingly. You're looking at a team here, the right people with the right skills. So if you think about the skills and attributes that are needed in a finance team, then ensure that anything that isn't particularly a strength of yours, or maybe you've just not had experience of it, is covered by some other expert within the team. So I don't feel any of these things should hold you back. I feel it's more about working out who you are as a leader, who you are as a finance leader, and making sure you find that right alignment with an organization. It's like aligning what they need to what you bring. And I do see more often than not, and I wish I could stop it sometimes before I see it happening, a misalignment. Now, you think what that misalignment does, going right back to the confidence point, if people don't align what they bring to what an organization needs, suddenly there's a big gap. And when they can't do what's most important in that organization, their confidence starts falling. So you're just looking to bring your most confident self. by the way, I never say just keep learning. Anything that you can learn, keep learning. But sometimes it's not about necessarily I'll do this role and this role and this role. It's picking up some of the skills from them and possibly learning those along the way.
Perfect. Another question from Mathieu. He is asking, how do you maintain or create a peer network to easily share or ask any questions outside of Svendesk?
My obvious answer there is going to be something like Grow CFO, which is obviously where I said I'm the lead professional mentor there. I mean, that's the objective of Grow CFO, was to create a peer network. You know, a lot of finance leaders say they just don't have the support available. They don't have the peer group they can tap into, you know, to ask anything they want to do. So Grow CFO is there as a community of finance leaders, and whether people are in a peer group doing the Future CFO program, or whether, you know, the CFO program I run for, you know, new people as a CFO, they're like cohorts of 6. So again, that group of 6 interact in each of the sessions and can create that relationship outside of that sort of program. So they really are the sort of ways in which you can connect with people with similar roles or in similar industries or with similar challenges that are coming up in certain sectors. You know, some people are in more sort of stable organizations and other in very, very high growth, and they have different challenges. So it's about finding that knowledge, wisdom that you can tap into.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned earlier, the CFO role is a lonely one. So having opportunities at places like CFO Connect and CFO Grow just to connect with peers, I think is probably quite important. Now, unfortunately, we are running out of time, but before we head out, I would like to ask you, Catherine, you've shared so much good advice, and I would like to know, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
Oh, I think the best piece of advice actually was around, you know, follow your joy and follow your passion. That is one that is sticking with me now. And also find your balance. I think those 3 things are incredibly important. I'm very lucky now. I mean, I do have a really good balance in my life, but that is what gives me the energy to then deliver at my absolute best in what I've chosen to do. And I really don't want it any differently now. I have seen the difference. You know, when I was slightly, you know, busier than when I say busier, I used to be busier, but I don't think I was achieving the same outcomes because I really wasn't giving myself enough time to really, you know, go internally, think more creatively, think sort of more broadly. So giving yourself time, finding your balance, and I do mean that, and looking after your mind within that. So thinking about your physical health as well as your mental and emotional health. That combination is what gives you the energy to then really make an impact in an area that you sort of love to work in, really.
Wonderful. On that note, thank you very much, Catherine, for sharing your time with us. Thank you to everyone in our audience for the great questions that you've asked. Everyone have a lovely evening or morning, depending on where you are, and go follow your joy and find your balance, and we'll see you very soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alexandra.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.